So how well does Alan Edmonds bourbon really age? Bourbon was one of those interesting colors that brought out a lot of strong opinions. Some people loved it, some people hated it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my 3 bourbon pairs and I will give you my honest thoughts about the good and the bad. The color bourbon was unique because it was all based on the burnishing and finishing. The leather is simply just the walnut upper, but what they did is they would add a black and brown burnishing and finish the shoe to make it bourbon. If you look closely, you can even see some of the spots where they missed, and you can see the walnut leather show through. Because of this, it's actually possible to use something like Renomat to completely remove all the bourbon burnishing and change the shoes back into walnut. I have seen a few people do this with good results, but I will never be doing this with Renomat at least because Renomat has to be the most foul-smelling product in the whole world I have ever inhaled. I think for a lot of people, Renomat may be a great product to do this with, but I will have to use something like rubbing alcohol or something else to remove the burnishing. But anyway, unlike the walnut shoes, the bourbon color almost always would have a black welt and a black sole edge. They also would mostly have black piping at the throat of the shoe. The first pair of bourbon that I ever purchased was actually a pair of Carlisle shoes in 2016 in May. These were one of my very first Allen Edmonds shoes. These were also my first pair of factory seconds I ever purchased. When I first got them, they looked really nice. For factory seconds, they were about as good of a pair as I could ask for. I said just a moment ago that the piping is usually black for burnished, but this was an exception. This just used the regular brown piping. But early on, one of my biggest shoe regrets was using the Allen Edmonds conditioner cleaner on this shoe. It completely altered the burnishing and ruined the existing look. I tried as hard as I could to restore it with polish and wax, but it never looked the same. I eventually just sent them back to Allen Edmonds to have them refinish them. Fortunately, they did come back looking a lot better. But the hard lesson here was not to use conditioner cleaner on the bourbon color unless you're really careful. But what I also learned was that conditioners like Bic 4 will work just fine on bourbon without altering the appearance of the burnishing, so I mainly use Bic 4 on my bourbon shoes. I don't really wear this one that much anymore, to be honest, as I don't need a lot of highly formal shoes right now in my life. But I refuse to get rid of these because there's just too much nostalgia, and I can still wear them in the right conditions. They also fit extremely well. They're very comfortable, so no way I'm keeping these. The second pair that I purchased was a pair of Strands. These were perhaps my most impressive shoe back when I got these in 2017. They just looked absolutely stunning on the day that I bought them. This is why I fell in love with the bourbon color. On overcast days, the color looks fantastic. I think it looks much better than the walnut strand, personally. Over time, you can see that this has changed color a bit. It has lightened up on the areas where the creasing happens the most. You can also see some scratches that reveal the lighter walnut-colored leather underneath. I'm going to see if I can cover them up and restore them later in this video. One other interesting thing about this pair of Strands is that they are actually an E-width, and I'm normally a D-width, but yet this pair fits pretty much exactly like a D-width. I guess I was lucky with this pair, but it just goes to show you that there's a lot of variation within sizing with Allen Edmonds, and you'll probably come across this at some point. The last pair of bourbon I ever purchased was a pair of Delray shoes. I got these during the Black Friday sale in late 2017. I have to admit that my tastes have changed quite a bit over the last 5 years, as I do not wear formal split toes very often anymore. But still, these looked really nice when they were new. And the 108 last is a very good last for me, just like the Carlisle shoes I already shown. This pair has lightened up the most over time out of all 3 pairs, and I'm not sure why. It's actually been worn the least of the 3, so I don't get it. Just look at these pictures and compare to how it looked when it was new versus how it looks now. You can see it's definitely lightened up a lot. This is what you can expect sometimes with the bourbon color. Also, because this was a Black Friday pair, the leather lining was not on par with the usual Allen Edmonds quality. Some, not all, but some of the Black Friday offerings are made up of leftover leather that Allen Edmonds saves and uses at the end of the year. These were also very inexpensive, so it's not surprising that they would be using the lower quality lining for this shoe. Fit-wise, they were slightly tighter than they should have been. I should have returned them in exchange for another pair, but these have worked out fine over time. I just keep them in these shoe trees that keep them slightly more stretched out, and they end up working out okay. So, what are the most common criticisms or concerns about the color bourbon? The first one, you don't know exactly what you're going to get in terms of color. This is true. It's a highly unpredictable color. Some pairs look great, some come out looking average, and others come out looking really awful. Second, it's a delicate color that can change easily, and it's hard to maintain the color, especially if you wear them a lot. Third, the black welt and black sole edge was the only option. Some people would have preferred brown. I probably would have liked this option too, but you only have black. Number 4, fixing blemishes can be difficult sometimes. Number 5, some of the factory seconds were so hideous that no one would want them. And the reason was because some bourbon had this greenish hue that overpowered the shoes, and it didn't always look good. My suggestions if you do buy bourbon are these. Number 1, don't wear bourbon when it's raining outside, as this will make it a high risk for altering the color. Second, avoid using any aggressive leather cleaning products on them. Stick with Bic 4 or something similar to that. Third, use a black or dark brown polish to restore the burnishing if needed. And number 4, if the bourbon finish ever becomes totally ruined, you could strip it down and make it walnut again. For those who wanted a bourbon-like color without the potential problems that the color would have, Allen Edmonds did develop this newer color called copper, which they released around 2020. While this is not exactly the same as bourbon color, it is very close in a lot of ways. The nice thing about copper was that it did not rely upon the burnishing effect that bourbon did. Copper also used a brown welt and a brown edge, which was refreshing for a lot of people. But like bourbon, the copper color is discontinued, so now there's no color like bourbon anymore. Will Allen Edmonds bring back the bourbon color? Possibly, because they have done this a couple of times already. However, I do think it's more likely that they would bring back the copper color. Copper just seemed to not present as many problems as bourbon did, but we shall see. So let's see if this will help fix the blemishes. First, I will use a little Saphir black cream polish just on the areas that need it. Let's see if this helps restore the color. Now just let it dry. Now I'll just buff it off. And as you can see, it did not help at all. The problem, I believe, is because there's too much wax and it's preventing the penetration of the color. So in this situation, what I will do is I will use a little bit of Allen Edmonds Cleaner Conditioner. This product will help strip away some of the wax and polish that's on the toes. but the key is not to use too much. You just want to strip away just a little bit. Now that the shoes have been cleaned a bit, I will once again use a little bit of Saphir cream polish in both dark brown and black. Once it's dried, just buff it off again. And it does look a lot better than it did before. I don't really need to use any neutral wax on these because the Saphir product already adds a nice shine even with just the cream polish. But if I wanted to do a higher shine, I could use neutral wax. I would probably recommend neutral wax on bourbon after you've used the cream polish. That's what seems to work best for me. And as you can see, it did help hide those scrapes. It did not remove them 100%, but definitely looks much better than it did before. So anyway, there you have it. These are my pairs of bourbon shoes, and this is how they've aged over the last couple years. All three of these pairs were purchased in 2016 to 2017, and you can see how they've aged over time. I hope this gives you an idea of what to expect if you do buy a bourbon shoe. Well, that's it for this episode. I'll be back soon with another video. Thank you for watching.